With the housing crisis and property prices increasing faster than we ever could have imagined, it seems like the great Australian dream of owning your own home seems further out of reach for many people. But thankfully, there are some tools that first home buyers can get their hands on and use to their advantage to buy their first home sooner. And in today's video, we are diving deep into the First Home Super Saver Scheme, which is one of those tools. And if you're new here, hi, I'm Queenie and I'm a licensed personal finance creator, and I'm here to help you make smart money moves. So if you've been dreaming about buying your first home, then the First Home Super Saver Scheme might just be the ultimate life hack for you. Keep in mind that this video is general advice only and not personal financial advice. You can read my full financial services guide in the description. Thanks so much to Pella for sponsoring this video, but we'll talk more about them later in this video and a very exciting update that Pella has for us. So what exactly is the First Home Super Saver Scheme? The First Home Super Saver Scheme is a government scheme which was introduced in 2017 to help Australians save for their first home in their superannuation. Basically, the way that it works is you can make extra voluntary contributions into your superannuation, and then you can withdraw those extra voluntary contributions from your super when you're ready to buy your first home. It's really important to keep in mind that you cannot withdraw any of your mandatory employer contributions from your super account. So the money that your employer puts into your superannuation, the superannuation guarantee, you cannot withdraw any of those funds. It's only these extra voluntary super contributions that you decide to make into your superannuation. So I actually am a huge fan of this scheme because you're not accessing your retirement savings per se. It's just kind of a smarter way that you can save for your first home in your superannuation and save on tax. Basically the same way that you would be putting aside some of your money into a bank account to save for your first home, you can basically do the same thing in your superannuation, but the benefit of doing it that way is when you put it in your superannuation, you're taxed less than if you were to put it in a bank account. So the extra contributions that you make into your superannuation are only taxed at 15%, whereas most of our marginal tax rates are 30%. So that's how you save on tax with this scheme. You can contribute $15,000 per year and you can withdraw a total of $50,000. So now let's jump into the eligibility and how it works. To be eligible to use this scheme, you need to be at least 18 years old, be a first home buyer, with some exceptions for financial hardship, someone who is planning to live in the property for at least 6 months after purchase, someone who has never made a release of the First Home Super Saver Scheme before, and the good news is you can still be eligible even if you buy your first home with a partner who doesn't meet all of these criteria. And more good news, you don't need to be an Australian citizen or an Australian resident for tax purposes to use the First Home Super Saver Scheme. So here are the steps to use the First Home Super Saver Scheme. The first step is to double check and see if you can use the First Home Super Saver Scheme with your super fund, because not all super funds are eligible. The second step is to set up a salary sacrifice arrangement with your employer. So you basically ask your employer to salary sacrifice an extra amount of money into your superannuation. But you can actually choose to make after-tax contributions as well. Then the next step is to make your voluntary extra contributions into your superannuation, either before tax or after tax. You can go through MyGov to determine your withdrawal eligibility, and then just make sure that you can withdraw your extra salary sacrifice contributions or the First Home Super Saver Scheme. Then you can apply for the First Home Super Saver Scheme determination with the ATO through MyGov, and this will let you know how much you can release from the First Home Super Saver Scheme. You can submit a request to the ATO to release the First Home Super Saver Scheme amount, and then once your funds are released, the ATO will send a release authority to your super and will instruct your super fund to release the First Home Super Saver Scheme amounts. The ATO will then withhold any applicable tax and pay the rest out to you. And this process normally takes between 5 to 20 business days. So it's a good idea to leave a margin of time just in case. So to apply for this scheme, you just go to MyGov, Super, Manage, and then find the First Home Super Saver Scheme. So now let's go into the pros and cons of using the First Home Super Saver Scheme. One of the pros is you may be able to access lower tax rates because super is only taxed at 15%, whereas most of our marginal tax rates are around 30%. Another pro is the money that you use in the First Home Super Saver Scheme earns interest. So you may actually be able to get a higher return than if you had that money sitting in a savings account. Another pro is that accessing the First Home Super Saver Scheme doesn't prevent you from accessing other first home buyer initiatives. And another pro is that you can access this scheme with multiple people. So for example, yourself and your partner, or yourself and a sibling if you're purchasing a property together. And this could potentially help you get a higher deposit than if you were not to use this scheme at all. So here are the cons of using the First Home Super Saver scheme. While $50,000 is a lot of money, when you compare it to the average house price in Australia, which is around $900,000, it doesn't seem like a lot of money, so it can be a bit disheartening. There are also limitations on how much you can contribute and withdraw, so it can take a few years in order to get a sizable amount of money. Your extra salary sacrifice contributions would also reduce your take-home pay, and you still may need to pay a bit of tax. However, there still is a 30% tax offset, which would still mean it would be less than if you were to save outside of your super. Another con is that this scheme is really complicated to wrap your head around and also to apply for with all of these limits and different restrictions. So it's up to you to see if it's worth it to save around $15,000. So let's have a look at some case studies using the First Home Super Saver scheme. Emily is a 28-year-old graphic designer. She earns $70,000 per year and she works remotely, which means she's able to live anywhere. She decides to buy her first home in a regional town and she hopes to save around $40,000 to contribute towards a 20% deposit. And she wants to accumulate the $40,000 using the First Home Super Saver scheme. She works out she can afford to make voluntary contributions of around $7,000 annually. Emily makes before tax contributions, meaning she's only taxed at 15%, and the reduction to her take-home pay is around $4,330 per annum. After 6 years, Emily can withdraw $43,000, including interest, and with the withdrawal tax applied. So this means she can comfortably reach her target. And if that money had gone to a traditional savings account with an interest rate of 4.5% per annum, Emily would have only ended up with $31,000, which is a difference of $12,000. So now let's have a look at John and Marco, who are 40 and 38 and are both professionals working in IT and marketing. They're looking to buy their first home in suburban Melbourne. They'd like to join forces and build up a deposit of roughly $200,000. Together, they've already managed to save $50,000 and want to use the scheme to supplement their savings. They also plan to invest some money in the stock market over the coming years. John earns $100,000 and Marco earns $90,000, and each decides to make before tax concessional contributions of $15,000 to their respective super funds. For both of them, this means a $9,800 reduction in their take-home pay. After 4 years, John and Marco are ready to buy their first home. They apply to withdraw $48,000 each, giving them a combined total savings of $97,000 from the First Home Super Saver scheme. They also have $132,000 in savings, and this is thanks to making regular deposits and the compound interest that they earned in a high interest savings account. Plus, they've also done fairly well by investing in shares and have about $20,000 to put towards their deposit. All up, John and Marco have a sizable deposit of $249,000. And the First Home Super Saver scheme helped them to boost their deposit by around $30,000. So now you're probably wondering, is the First Home Super Saver scheme actually right for me? Some people that can really benefit from the First Home Super Saver scheme are particularly people in a higher tax bracket, because the tax savings are quite significant if you have time to save and grow your contributions, and if you like a bit of structure to help you stick with your savings goals. It's also important to note that if you do have an outstanding debt with the ATO or another Commonwealth agency, your First Home Super Saver scheme release amount may be offset against this debt. And let's have a look at another real-life case study from Anna, who used the First Home Super Saver scheme. So Anna says, the thing that appealed to me most about the First Home Super Saver scheme was that I was able to reduce my taxes and save for my first home, which ultimately could help me save for a first home faster. The way that she set it up was she reached out to her employer and she set up a salary sacrifice plan to contribute a certain amount of her income into her super. The biggest challenge that she found with the First Home Super Saver scheme was that it was hard to track her contributions. There was also a lot of jargon and difficult words, and it was difficult to wrap her head around. She says that there's not much that she'd do differently, but she does wish that she knew about the First Home Super Saver scheme earlier, because then she would have contributed to her super earlier, and therefore it would allow the compounding to do its thing. All in all, she says that it was a really great way to help her save for her first home and go through the motions. Personally, would like to add to this, I honestly wish that I knew about this scheme back when I was saving for my first home. As you may know, I actually bought my first home back in 2020, and I totally wish I knew about this scheme earlier, because I 100% would have used it. But you live and you learn. Thank you so much to Pearler for sponsoring this video. Pearler is the investing app that I use. I honestly love all of the features and how they're designed for long-term investors. And if you'd like to try them for yourself, you can use my code Queenie for a $20 credit. Pearler also has some really amazing resources that can help you learn more about the First Home Super Saver Scheme, and I've put those resources down in the description below. And write me a comment below with the word secret in it, just so I know you watched this video all the way through. Thank you. Bye.